Hello there. Today I'm looking at a very rare wine. This is Rockford's Black Shiraz. It's a Sparkling Shiraz. It's from Barossa, and this is the 2022 degorgement. It's a non-vintage wine. In fact, it's made from a Solera, so it's from multiple vintages, but the date of its degorgement as a sparkling wine is 2022. I wanted to look at a classic old-fashioned sparkling Shiraz from Australia, and by all accounts Rockford's Black Shiraz is just that. To me, the benchmark of this style is probably Seppelt's Show limited release Shiraz, which is a vintage wine. The point is basically that this style of wine is made in two ways. You can either use high quality Shiraz that's aged for a long time in old oak to smooth out and soften, or you can use young, fresh, fruity wine and make it quite sweet. To my mind, the longer aging in oak gives the wine far greater complexity and makes it something really special. And my view there is, it seems to be borne out by the back label, in which a note, which I assume comes from Rocky O'Callaghan, Rockford's founder, where he talks about finding in his father's cellar an old Seppelt sparkling Shiraz, and the very clear and vivid impression that it left on his palate. So Rocky O'Callaghan founded Rockford Wines back in the 1980s, in 1984. He'd been working for Seppelt and was assistant winemaker at their Rutherglen winery back in the 60s. In the early 70s, he bought 2 hectares of vines just below the Barossa ranges, and by the early 80s he'd founded a company. He planted these vineyards, and the first wine he released was from the 1984 vintage. Evidently, while he was working at Seppelt's in Rutherglen, Rocky O'Callaghan had met a winemaker, a legendary figure in Australia's wine industry, Colin Preece. And it was Colin Preece who had been in charge at the time of making Seppelt's Show Reserve Sparkling Shiraz. So when Rocky O'Callaghan came to make this wine, the techniques he applied were those that had been used by Colin Preece. And I think today the Black Shiraz is acknowledged as one of Australia's leading sparkling Shirazes. And I'm very lucky to be tasting this at all today, because evidently only about 600 cases of this are made a year. So at Rockford's, their top wine is the basket press Shiraz. So it's a traditional old-fashioned Barossa Shiraz. Not only do they use their own home vineyards around the winery, but they also take fruit from locations such as Kalimna, Ebenezer, Mopper Springs, the Eden Valley and the central Barossa. Some of the vineyards they take fruit from are 130 years old, so these old vines giving fantastic concentration of fruit, unirrigated, so really low yielding, and in many cases, because South Australia is phylloxera free, on their own roots still, so totally ungrafted. This wine starts its life being made as if it was the basket press Shiraz. So at the winery, winemaking is very traditional. We're talking about hand-picked fruit. It goes through an old petrol-driven 1880s distemmer crusher. Fermentation takes place in shallow slate open top fermenters, and pressing is done using old basket presses. So basket presses give wonderful gentle extraction. It's by far the best way of making old Shiraz. So each year they take a portion of the wine that is destined to go into the basket press Shiraz, and that goes into a Solera. So there's something like 35 vintages in this Solera, and this Solera is intended entirely for the Black Shiraz. Now, approximately 30% of this Solera is drawn off every year, and the portion that's drawn off then ages for 3 years in old oak barrels. So giving it time to soften, giving it time for the tannins to smooth out, giving a very gentle application of oxygen as it seeps in through the staves of the barrel, allowing the wine to age. And in fact, the Sparkling Shiraz ages for longer before release than the basket press does, which will only spend sort of 18 months, 2 years in barrel. After 3 years aging, the wine's then put into bottle for a second fermentation, so obviously put into bottle with yeast and sugar. Following its second fermentation, once it's sparkling, the wine rests for a year with its yeast lees in bottle, as you would do with a good quality bottle fermented sparkling wine. I understand there is a dosage the addition of sugar of somewhere up to the region of 26 grams per litre of sugar. So there's a reasonable sweetness in this, just to, again, to smooth the wine out completely. And then ideally, this is a style of wine that the back label suggests should be aged further. In fact, Rocky O'Callaghan's note suggests that contrary to his experience, it's a good idea to hide these wines from your children. So let's have a look at it and see what the fuss is about, shall we? Okay, so to start, we have a really quite deep, dark colour. It's not quite opaque, it's a ruby red, and there looks to be quite a fine bead. It's difficult to see how the bubbles are rising inside the wine. I'm not particularly looking at legs on the side of the glass, but the wine is 13.6% alcohol, so it's not a lightweight wine. Let's look at the aroma, shall we? And actually, you have to be quite careful, because you don't need to stick your nose right the way into the glass, because the sparkle is throwing the wonderful aromas of this mature Shiraz out of the glass at me. I mean, to begin with, you've got a sort of a rich, deep black cherry note, and then more of a sort of a black plum, a sort of dams and bullace note, ripe, rich, warming, and yet at the same time, overlaying all that, there is a sort of a slightly leathery, savoury note of older Shiraz. So let's have a taste, shall we? In honesty, the sparkle is soft, it's dissipated from the glass, but it's still there in the mouth, lifting the freshness of the wine beautifully. It's such a sort of a juicy, black cherry, boysenberry fruit. It's rounded, it's ebullient, it's smooth, it's rich. There is perhaps a core of darker fruit. There's a little bit of that sort of savoury, leathery, earthy note, but there's not a particularly spicy note. Any tannins there are very, very smooth. They're smooth and fine. And of course, you don't want tannins particularly in a sparkling wine like this, because the tannins will play against the fizz and will stop the wine from being too fizzy. But I think that's a delicious combination there. The alcohol's in balance. There's a sort of a richness to the back palate that's rounded and smooth. And that's where the sort of the black plum notes are coming in here. Beyond that, there's a sort of a bit of concentrated sweet licorice. There is a definite sweet note to the wine. It's rounded, it's rich, it's juicy, but it doesn't necessarily come across as being sugar sweet, because the sweetness isn't just showing on my tongue. In fact, it's more at the back of the mouth. It's more a richness, a ripeness. There's almost a sort of a chocolatey texture on the mid palate. It's wonderfully smooth, and the acidity keeps going to the end. So there's a really nice freshness on the finish that's lifting some sort of delicate violet perfume out of the wine behind this sort of core of more sort of dark, black, rich fruit. The wine's beautifully complex. It has lovely length. And it's so exciting. The fizz just sort of lifts the fruit beautifully. So yes, it's a very different style of wine. I think it's a wonderful style. I mean, my understanding is that Rocky O'Callaghan doesn't make the wine anymore, but clearly it's a style that he has put in place, and I hope his successor Ben Radford will continue to make these wines, because this is an absolute gem. It's a piece of Australian history, and I'd also say it goes really well with turkey, so great for Christmas celebration sort of time of the year, because the lovely juicy fruit is a great match with the sort of the quite dry meat that turkey is, almost like sort of serving cranberry sauce alongside it. So well worth that as a try for something slightly different to have with a Christmas dinner. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the tasting interesting. If you've enjoyed it, do please press the like button. Do consider sharing it with your friends if you think they'd be interested in watching it as well. It would be fantastic to have your support, so if you'd like to sign up and follow us, that would be great. Do also leave any comments you have. We'd love to hear your feedback about the wines, the tasting, or anything else relating to that. So, thank you again for watching, and I do hope you'll join us for another tasting in the very near future. Bye for now.